tell you we are ready to die for Yahya Jammeh. We are ready to die for Yahya Jammeh.
We are ready to die for Yahya Jammeh. A chilling declaration shouted by the young men in Kanilai who call themselves the Green Youths.
And today I want to announce to you that come November, this November 2025, I'm coming back to the Gambia. The date and flood
Ibu Samu, Babili Mansako, Kabobila, APRC, Green Youth Soul, Albeda Oda, APRC, Green Youth Soul, Bilambe Green Youth Soul, me formo Kriela, Youth Soul, Youth Lafaka, join J, Ibu Samu Kumandi, Ibu Samu Blowing, Air Force Paramilla Blowing. So, funding, we are ready to die for Yahya Jammeh. We are ready to die for Yahya Jammeh.
Abaraka Lamin Sisse. Et la Koubaka Mobetiata Bakele. Ko ite, Misiko Feke to Karinge Mane, Yeti Wulu. Allah député, Allah ministre, mimbe joyala, akamin ko ngamoyle. Demba sabala la fa be foni dama amam banku soto je ya fa kundile. Etelebe sila, ikata imam malu, iman sila. Demba masila akafa ko Yahya Jammeh be bulo folla Yahya Jammeh ka fanni keketi ay najam hadin ta fango nin demba o foje fango na laftan nga ben ala suko na mbata raje tako Yahya Jammeh mandi kol ko kuma dima bu ka bandamen kuma fomu tawleti ibe taw kambare be tawlale nga tawra ngo sembendika ali tetu ali jay ala barakatu.
Following Yahya Jammeh's latest announcement that he intends to return to the Gambia, these loyalists reactivated themselves. They gathered, they marched, and they publicly vowed to defend him with their lives. In Kanilai, Jammeh's home village, APRC supporters have been seen cleaning and preparing his former residence. They say they are getting ready for his arrival, an arrival they believe could happen before the month ends. Their message is simple and loud. We will welcome him at the airport. These are their words, their belief, their loyalty.
Of the refugee camps. I don't want any Gambian woman, any Gambian for that matter, to flee the country for whatever reason because of Yahya Jammeh. I love the country and I have to live in peace. Leave the country in peace. And that was why I decided to leave, to give them a chance. They told me, you have to go outside of the country. Something I rejected before. They pleaded with me and I said, okay, I looked at it. I watched CNN. I saw people that were moving in other parts of the world, refugees, and the way they are treated. I said, okay, I don't want any Gambian, my friend or my family or my enemy, to go through this very, very, very humiliating treatment. That is not what I have for the Gambians, all Gambians for that matter. And so I decided, they said they are going to stay with me. Alpha Conde and Assis of Mauritania. And they took off with me. The rest is history. It was agreed that I can leave and come back after 6 months. Without preconditions. That is what is there. That I can go back to the Gambia as a Gambian citizen, and there were so many things that were guaranteed, and as soon as I left, you all know what happened. Now, I'm here to tell you that 6 months turned out to be almost 9 years. 9 years plus. And today, I want to announce to you that come November, this November 2025, I'm coming back to the Gambia. The date and flight arrangements, travel arrangements will be announced by the executive interim leader.
The truth about Jammeh's exit agreement. What was promised, what was not. When Yahya Jammeh left the Gambia on January 21, 2017, many stories and rumors followed him into exile. One of the most repeated claims, especially in his own later phone calls, is that he had an agreement to return after 6 months. But what does the evidence actually show? The only official document from Jammeh's departure is the joint declaration signed by ECOWAS, the African Union, the United Nations, and representatives from both Jammeh and the incoming Barrow administration. This document guaranteed him a peaceful exit and respect for his rights as a former head of state under Gambian law. It was assured that there would be no revenge, no harassment of his family, and that he could live temporarily in Equatorial Guinea. Most importantly, the declaration states that Yahya Jammeh would be at liberty to return to the Gambia at any time of his choosing in accordance with the law. But in that document, which is public, there is no line, no clause, and no mention of any 6-month return agreement. Nothing written, nothing recorded, and nothing ever confirmed by ECOWAS, the UN, or the Gambian government. The 6-month claim exists only in Yahya Jammeh's later statements, not in any formal diplomatic record. After Jammeh left, the Gambia began a new chapter. The Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission documented serious human rights violations under his 22-year rule. Victims demanded justice, and suddenly any potential return became tied to legal and security considerations, not a private promise, not a political handshake, and not a 6-month timetable. So the factual reality is simple. There was an agreement, but not the one he describes. There were guarantees, but not a guaranteed return. And whether he comes back or not is now a question of law, justice, and national stability, not of a 6-month promise that no one else has ever confirmed.
Mr. Chair, I took this job because I felt at the time that terrible things had happened in my country. The call of duty has arrived. I had to do something about it. And for that, I thank Honorable Abubakar Tambedu very much for giving me the opportunity to serve my country in the capacity of lead counsel to the TRRC. When I took the job, little did I know that it was going to be the most important work I have ever done. I have done cases of the highest order. I have done cases that are most complex. I have done cases that are much talked about everywhere else. From genocide against sitting head of states to some of the most notorious rebels. I have done them all. And I thought I have seen it all. But little did I know that the information that I was receiving about my country, disturbing as it was in fact the tip of the iceberg. I remember that day at the Sunset Beach Hotel when I gave that presentation on how to investigate these cases, and we tried to chart out a map on what the investigations was going to be. I mean, much of it came off head from our brainstorming exercise, and I didn't see much of it. But Mr. Chair, sooner I discovered that we are dealing with a very dark chapter in our history. I realized that what we were dealing with was a beast with many heads. A member of the team just tipped me a little while ago, suggesting that perhaps I should have given a closing statement. I recall I discussed this issue with the chair and we agreed to defer that to some other day. But I can't really stave off the temptation to say a few words about what we have achieved here. In 1994, a group of soldiers hijacked our democracy and suspended our constitution and made us believe that they were soldiers with a difference, that they are going to salvage this country and save it from rampant corruption, nepotism, and bring in transparency, accountability, and probity. And we embraced them, at least many of us, me including. And if we are all honest, most of us, the majority, embraced it. Because also, we were tired of the slow pace of development. We had a great democracy. We had one of the best civil services in the world. We had an unblemished human rights record, one to boast about everywhere. But we kicked it aside and embraced a military junta. And they made us believe they were soldiers with a difference. And that is, in fact, or was in fact the commencement of our inquiry. Soon we realized that they were humiliating our political leaders, they were humiliating the elite, putting them on military trucks and dumping them in military barracks. They attacked people on the roads to show power. People were shot at by these convoys. We have received evidence from the actual perpetrators. Sana Sabali himself came here and told the commission all those shenanigans they were doing. They were imposing their will on the Gambian people in the most dastardly manner. Mr. Chair, we saw them attack the security personnel and dumped most of the senior security officers in jail unlawfully. Unlawfully. And we have seen how on the night of September 6th, they Nicodemously went to the jail and unlawfully tortured and brutalized these senior military officers. It was done cowardly. We have had Edward Singate testify about it. We have had Ibrahim Chongan testify about it, and a host of older soldiers testify about this. I wasn't prepared, Mr. Chair, to deliver closing arguments, but we would give you a gist, a flavor of what we were dealing with. As if that was not enough in the night of September, they started arresting our political leaders again and torturing them at Mile 2 prisons. We've had Edward Singate talk about how he managed to stop it. We have heard Sana Sabali talk about how he did it, how OJ and others became victims. But this was just these little symptoms that were emerging. Lawyer Usman Silla wrote to Jammeh and told him how he was seeing the seeds of dictatorship being showed and how Jammeh was planning to self-perpetuate himself in power and that he must stop. He was one of the few brave men who dared the burgeoning dictatorship and protested directly to those concerned. But these guys, they had a different agenda. As they were pushing constitutional reform with a view to bringing in a new constitution, it was quite obvious, at least to lawyer Usman Silla, that these people had no intention of relinquishing power. Even if we were to return to democracy, it would be democracy as per members of the junta, democracy as per Yahya Jammeh. And the facts would soon unfold, Mr. Chair. As the junta started taking the necessary steps to silence all sections of Gambian society so that Jammeh can self-perpetuate himself in power. And we have seen the steps he's taken. The first was to silence the soldiers. We have heard what happened in November 11, where they took 11 officers and men of the Gambian National Army and executed them in cold blood, in utter blatant violation of the law. These men were unarmed. They were stripped, almost naked, humiliated. They were tortured and executed. And we have heard how the leaders sat before the commission and derided the international conventions that apply to all men of civilized people of civilized behavior, the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols. Much to your chagrin, Mr. Chair, because I could recall you telling Sana Sabali, I spent years teaching generals about these rules. You sit here and tell us that these are not important. They disregarded completely the applicability or the application of these laws and did what they wanted. I recall Edward Singate saying, Jammeh told us to take no prisoners. And he interpreted that as an order to kill all the ringleaders. And that is what they did. On Remembrance Day, or day before Remembrance Day, they executed their colleagues in cold blood. They wanted to silence those who could potentially challenge their authority. But they did not stop there. The next step was to see who were the dissenters. Quickly, Sana Sabali realized that they are off onto the wrong track. Soon, Yahya Jammeh had different ideas. Sana had to go because Sana had the audacity to say, no, we got to go back to the barracks. We've heard Edward Singate about how they hatched a plan and eliminated him, and falsely accused him of something he never did and has no clue about, dumped him in prison, tortured him, and secured a conviction of him for 9 years. He even testified before the commission that he served his term. They wouldn't even let him out. Well, we have seen his name on the wish list. How did you call it? The spiritual hit list of Yahya Jammeh. He was that much of a nuisance to him. He too deserved to die, at least spiritually. And then Koro Sise came. And then come Koro Sise, a young man with the brightest future ahead of him. Super brilliant, of high intellect, wonderful training. Because he objected to their nefarious plans, they had to silence him. But knowing Koro, sacking him from the job would not have silenced him, they decided to silence him permanently. Those were the words of Mustafa Marong, former Minister of Justice, who appeared before this commission. And that was the beginning of the crisis we were going to face. Because at that stage, Gambians started acquiescing. Gambians started accepting. The complaints reduced, and Jammeh won elections. Whew. The beginning of much more trouble to come. In order to further solidify his power, he started attacking the media. We have heard how over 140 personnel of the media fraternity were arrested, detained, and some tortured. We have heard how media houses were attacked and burnt, including that of our chief executive, Baba Gale Jallow, who on several occasions was whisked to the NIA, threatened and intimidated, like many of his colleagues who had to end up in exile because Jammeh had to muscle the media. They had to keep quiet so that he could self-perpetuate himself in power. But he did not limit himself just to that. He attacked the students because they dared to complain. We remember on April 10 and 11 how 14, at least 12 of our young people, students, were brutally butchered along Kairaba Avenue and near Red Cross and so forth, by forces under the command of Jammeh. And we have heard how the instructions came from Cuba to Aissatou Njie Seydi, who appeared before this commission to say, well, he ordered the military to go and take care of the situation. We have heard from Grinyai, who explained how they had instructions and he had to shoot at students. Mr. Chair, the attacks on the Gambian people were not only limited to that. Through a beauty pageant and through a protocol girl system, our sisters were humiliated, sexually abused, just to further subjugate the Gambian people, and so ego and so superiority for one's self-aggrandizement. We have seen, Mr. Chair, how institutions were created that are aimed at further strengthening or creating a dictatorship. The NIA, with all those monstrous powers they were given, and a very compliant justice system, anchored and chaperoned by so-called Nigerian mercenary judges. And we have seen how investigative processes and judicial processes were compromised in order to produce desired results for Jammeh. And Mr. Chair, not only the institutions for investigating and prosecuting and judging, but even the institution to keep these people, the prison, became his five-star hotel, lacking of any facility that would help a person have a good life. The mere fact of being in Mile 2 is a violation of a person's rights, because it is completely at odds with the UN standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. And, Mr. Chair, if one were to end up in Mile 2, you leave being half the person or less of the person you were when you went in. And Jammeh knew that. That's why he called it the five-star hotel. And we have seen how Jammeh had dealt with those people who dared challenge his authority, or those he perceived to be challenging his authority. And we have heard of all those so-called coups that happened and how he dealt with them. You've heard about the Ndur Cham one in 2006, March, wherein those who were involved and those who were not involved were corralled and taken to Mile 2 prisons, brutalized, taken to the NIA, tortured and forced to give confessions which were used against them in court and convicted. We have heard how Langtombong's evidence was manufactured. In fact, today our witness talked about how they sat there and manufactured evidence to Jammeh's knowledge, which led to sentencing Langtombong to death. And that is the ultimate. It could have been executed. If that had happened, we would have lost a patriotic son, unlawfully. And this has happened several times. Mr. Chair, even political dissent was so suppressed that Jammeh could easily sail through elections. He manipulated the laws to ensure that he remained in power. That's why he had the audacity to tell us, I will be in power for a billion years, because he had all the confidence. He's taken all these steps. He has instituted a dictatorship. And when Sandeng and others decided to protest, he treated them in the only language he understood, violence, leading to the death of Solo Sandeng and the brutal torture of his cohorts. This was the Gambia that we had. So important was his throne to him that he would not even spare his relatives. We had today, from a person who was very close to him, that he killed at least 5 of them just because he believed those people wanted him dead. And in the process, Mr. Chair, I have just sat down here and draw up a list of those who were killed attributed to Jammeh and his forces. And Mr. Chair, my count, or our count, came to 214 people. 214 people in a small country like Gambia that borders or smacks of crimes against humanity. For a country as small as Gambia that smacks of crimes against humanity. And I can give you a list. November 11, 11 people, 11 soldiers summarily executed. April 10th, 12 school children and 2 people executed. His relatives, 5 of them, Haruna Jasaja, Sise Bujiling, Momadou Lamin Nyasi, Masi Jammeh, and others. 5 of them. Daba Marena and Co. We have heard from the person closest to Jammeh just yesterday as to how Jammeh sat there and planned how to lie to the Gambian people. What happened to these people? How Tumbul Tamba called and said, tell him fucking mission accomplished. And how he was given a big bag of money. Daba Marena and Co. lost their lives unnecessarily. They did nothing. We've heard how the West African migrants were butchered in several places around the country, 67 of them. Initially, we thought they were 34, then 44, then 57, and ultimately 67 people butchered. And the government went on a campaign to cover this up. Well, we have had even today the witch hunting exercise that was ordered by Jammeh. 41 people died. A lot of them, our grandmothers and our grandfathers, humiliated, tortured, some sexually abused. We've heard about the fraudulent PATP, that is the President Alternative Treatment Program. We've heard that. Well, only one person claimed to have been cured, and that person did not come to the commission. It's being rumored out there. But everybody else who was in that program and testified before this commission said that they are still HIV positive, and that soon after the treatment they had to go into conventional medicine. Without that, they would have died. They were hoodwinked into believing that our president had a cure. And Mr. Chair, let nobody kid you. If the president of your country tells you he can do something, the tendency is you would believe him. He fraudulently lured our sick people into a treatment program that was bogus. He was a charlatan. He was a quack. Can't be described in any lesser way, Mr. Chair. Ensa Keita testified here and talked about how he was captured and taken to Kanilai and being tortured. And 8 people he provided that list were killed while he was there. 8 people. And he, including that woman who was supposed to have a beard, and they butchered her for bamboo sada to be given to the crocodiles as charity. Charity for who? For the benefit of Jammeh. Why? For him to entrench himself on that throne. If you add that all together, it gives you about 204. Well, yes, about 204. And then we have written down another list of those who are not counted. Korosise, Usman Korosise, Deda Haidara, Baba Job, Ndongo Mbub, Soldaw, Mahawa Cham, Ndur Cham, Tumane Jallo, Abdoulaye Gueye, Alma Momane, Amadou Doumbouya, Dawda Nyasi, Mustafa Koli, Ilo Jallo, Mariama Kamara and her husband Alpha Jallo. This we've not been able to investigate conclusively yet, but we are still at it. Mahmoud Sise and Ibu Job. We had Oya. He testified before here. He said Yahya Jammeh instructed them to chop them up. It wasn't sufficient to just kill them. It wasn't sufficient to decapitate them. They had to chop them up. Gruesome. 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 And Tumbul Tamba. And I will come back to him. The Nigerian killed by Alma Momane after the Jammeh convoy. Well, we've had Jallo today and yesterday saying Jammeh protected him. This was a country where if you kill in the name of the head of state, you get protected or even get promoted. This was the Gambia we lived in. Yahya Jammeh was captured. The rebel attack in Farafenni, he was tortured so badly, few months later he died. Jammeh created these institutions wherein torture was the name of the game. torture was the order of the day. It was his star chamber. We've heard the NIA officer saying that torture was almost certain to happen in cases where he is involved. In fact, we've heard from someone so close to Jammeh who told us sometimes he will come disguised and participate in torture. Well, the public may not have heard that. Yes, but it is evidence before the commission. We have heard how video recorders are carried by some of his agents, and they will take videos of tortures, well, and maybe even killings, because we have heard how Dabamarena and co were dealt with. Tumbul had to come with a video recorder and a video camera and had to show Jammeh proof. I am ashamed that this was the country our people lived in. I'm ashamed that this is the country that my parents lived in. I'm ashamed that this is the country my children live in, and this is where they're growing up. This is what happened in Gambia. Between 220 murders to 250 murders occurred in this country during Jammeh's rule, attributable to Jammeh. And that is not the enforced disappeared. We've heard from Sheikh Ujala. Jammeh told him, oh, Solo is lucky, but for my mother, I would have disappeared him. Well, disappearing people was part of his modus operandi. Indeed, Buba Yabo disappeared. Abdullah An disappeared. Babai Sanyang disappeared. Chief Ibrahim Amane disappeared. Omar Haidara disappeared. Sidi Sane disappeared. Momodu Job disappeared. And Kanyiba Kanyi, we've heard from his wife how the NIA took him away from their home. We've heard from people who were at NIA, at Mile 2 prisons, describing how he was taken away at night. So bad it was that when civil servants went to work, they're not sure they're going to come back home. And to tame the civil service, he had the laws to do it. You dance to his tune, you're safe. You don't, you face the peril of a false information charge or an economic crimes charge or being sacked by a letter of 1 or 2 lines or at least 1 sentence without recourse to law. That is the evidence that's been unearthed before this commission. There may be deniers. Yes, there will be deniers. But these numbers don't lie. These numbers don't lie. If you ask the family of Solo Sandeng, they would tell you we feel the pain. Deny as much as you wish, but we feel the pain. If you ask Amadou Kebe, he would say, deny as much as you want. I am walking with 1 foot shorter. Ask those students who were there on that fateful day of April 10th. Some would tell you I have a bullet lodged in my body. Those things don't lie. Deny as much as you wish. But the facts speak for themselves. And the Gambian people have seen it. What we had was a terrible dictatorship that would do everything to self-perpetuate and to strengthen its so-called supremacy over the Gambian people. No wonder it demanded to be crowned. And we had minions running around the country trying to secure that. We have heard Yahya Jammeh saying that the meetings were held at his home. If the Gambian people were in strong at that point, we would have been having a monarchy now. The kingdom of, I don't want to say it. with James Junkung the first as our king. That is what was going to happen. And thanks to God, the Gambian people dug deep into their reservoir and said, no, 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 it's not going to happen. But by this time, we had gone too far into a dictatorship. We have gone too far into self-perpetuation with 22 years. We have gone too far deep in corruption, where the whole treasury and the central bank was an extension of the executive household. We have heard from Mr. Njai, who testified a few days ago, how his property was taken away from him in gangster style. Mr. Chair, all these things I am saying tells me crimes against humanity, crimes against humanity, crimes against humanity. And the forum to deal with that is not only limited in Gambia. It could be Gambia, it could be Ghana, it could be West Africa, it could be somewhere in Africa, it could be the ICC. So no matter how people deny, no matter how one can control what may happen in Gambia, that same institution cannot control what happens outside or elsewhere. We have seen Hussein Habri. He's run away for 20-something years. He had to face the law. The other day I saw a publication with the Justice Dial pointing at Jammeh. Perhaps that is what needs to happen. Justice must happen. We all crave for reconciliation. And that is fundamental. That is absolutely important. We all crave for unity of the Gambian people because we are in one little boat. And all of us have to be our brother's keeper so that we can keep this little boat afloat. But that said, there must also be justice. There should be justice for the victims. There should be justice for us as a people because we are all scared, we are all traumatized as a people because of the dark chapter that happened to us. 22 years of brutality, 22 years of disrespect for the Gambian people. But we are the cause of it because we succumbed. We accepted it. We coached him through it. We guided him through it. We told him we would accept it. And no wonder when he threw water, even some of our imams would dive just to touch that water, because coming from him, it has spiritual value. Embarrassing situation. This is what I see Dr. Cisse asking whether that is true. Yes, indeed, it happened in this country. Dictatorship, self-perpetuation in power, and corruption is a recipe for disaster. But in order to free ourselves from those shackles, we have to ensure that there is rule of law in this country and that we have strong democratic institutions. Otherwise, we are doomed. And this has to be the cornerstone of the recommendations of the TRRC. If never again is to be meaningful, it has to be anchored on rule of law. It has to be anchored on strong institutions. It has to be anchored on a disciplined society. I pray to God that we reform our attitudes and we show commitment to this little country called Gambia, that we have so much, as said by Mr. Carr, borrowed from our children. We have to be careful the Gambia we hand over to them. If we do not correct the ills of the past, we will be sowing seeds of disaster for the future. I leave it at that, Mr. Chair. I think we have made a good case. even those who are in denial, if they search deep down, they would see that the truth has come out. And the truth is, Jammeh took us on a wild ride for his own self-aggrandizement. He has to pay the price. And those who enabled him also have to pay the price. Justice must be done. It must be seen to be done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, TRRC, documented serious human rights violations during Jammeh's 22-year rule. Victims and their families continue to wait for justice, and for many of them, the idea of his return reopens deep wounds. Each announcement from Jammeh, often delivered through phone calls broadcast at APRC events, brings back painful memories for some and fierce loyalty for others. It is a divide that still shapes the Gambia today. Now the nation finds itself in the middle of November, the month Jammeh said he would return. But days are passing and the reality is still unclear. Supporters remain hopeful. Critics remain concerned, and the country stands in a quiet tension, waiting. Will Yahya Jammeh step foot on Gambian soil again? Will his loyal supporters fill the airport as they said? Or will this be another announcement that ends without action? The month is not yet over, and the truth will reveal itself at the end of it. This is the story of loyalty and resistance, of memory and justice, of a nation caught between its past and its future. As November fades, the Gambia waits to see whether a former ruler's shadow will walk back into the light.